There are stories that palaces keep. Not in archives, not in official records, not in the kind of leather-bound volumes that historians request and governments approve. These are the other stories, the ones that live in the break rooms, in the servant staircases, in the quiet corners where staff eat their lunches and lower their voices when a senior officer walks past. This is one of those stories. Margaret Holloway worked inside the palace for 23 years. She started at 21, pushing a linen cart down corridors so long they seemed to disappear into a different century. She retired at 44, quietly, without ceremony, the way most people who do extraordinary things tend to leave, through a side door, with a small cake and a card signed by people who genuinely meant every word. She never gave an interview. She never sold her story. She never even told her daughter the full version until the girl was grown, married, and sitting at a kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold between her hands. But palace staff remember. They remember the Tuesday in early November when the temperature had dropped suddenly, and the heating in the East Corridor was doing what it always did in November, working in theory, failing in practice. They remember the visiting delegation, the extra security, the flowers ordered specifically for the blue reception room, and the quiet, competent chaos that fills a palace when important guests are expected. And they remember Margaret. Specifically, they remember that on that particular Tuesday, for the first time in 11 years, she stopped humming. What happened next kept 3 senior security officials in a meeting room for 6 hours. It resulted in the quiet rewriting of 2 internal protocols and 1 fire regulation procedure that had not been updated since 1987. It was never reported in any newspaper. It was never confirmed by any spokesperson. But every single person who worked those corridors that day will tell you the same thing, in the same low voice, with the same expression of quiet awe. The most elegant security trap in that palace's recent memory was not designed by a specialist. It was not triggered by a camera or a panic button or a 2-way radio. It was triggered by a cigarette. And the woman holding it was humming one moment and completely, terrifyingly silent the next. To understand what Margaret did, you first have to understand what a working palace actually is. From the outside, it is ceremony. It is gates and guards and the precise geometry of uniforms. It is horses and flags and the controlled theater of national identity. People photograph it. People travel thousands of miles to stand outside it and feel something they cannot quite name. From the inside, it is a village. A very old, very particular village, with its own rhythms, its own hierarchy, its own language of small gestures and understood silences. And like every village, it runs not on its most visible inhabitants, but on the ones you never see. The housemaids arrive before the light does. By the time the first official of any kind sets foot in any formal corridor, Margaret and her colleagues have already moved through every room like a quiet tide, straightening, lifting, folding, wiping, replacing, adjusting. They know which door hinges sing in damp weather. They know which carpet runner has a lifted edge that will catch a heel if you are not paying attention. They know the precise smell of each room at each hour, because rooms in old buildings have smells that shift with temperature and time, and if something is different, you notice. This is not a skill anyone teaches. It is something that accumulates like sediment over years of showing up and paying attention. Margaret had accumulated more of it than almost anyone. By the time of the Tuesday in question, she had been working those corridors for 13 years. She knew the face of every regular staff member, every regular security officer, every delivery person who came on a schedule. She knew which visiting officials had been before and which were new. She knew, without being told, when the atmosphere of a particular corridor had shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but in the way that a note played slightly off-key shifts the feeling of a piece of music without most people being able to say precisely why. She also hummed. This was not a performance. It was not even entirely conscious. It was simply what Margaret did, a low, wandering, tuneless hum that followed her through her work the way a shadow follows a person in afternoon light. Junior staff had learned to track her by it. If you could hear Margaret humming, you knew roughly where she was. If the humming was getting closer, you checked that your work was done properly. If the humming was steady and distant, everything was fine. Her colleague and closest friend among the staff was a woman named Dorothy, 10 years older, senior linen supervisor, keeper of the break room biscuit tin, with a firmness that brooked absolutely no negotiation. Dorothy had worked alongside Margaret for 9 of those 13 years. She described her once to a new junior who had asked, with the particular precision of someone who had thought carefully about their words. Margaret, Dorothy said, replacing the lid on the biscuit tin with finality, notices things the way other people breathe, without effort, without stopping, all the time. She paused. The humming is just how you know she's still being polite about it. Nobody entirely understood what that meant at the time. They understood it later. Also working that corridor on the Tuesday in question was Sophie, 22 years old, 7 months into her position, still at the stage where she moved through the palace with the careful deliberateness of someone who was aware, at every moment, that she was inside a building of considerable historical and national importance. Sophie was conscientious, quick, a little anxious, and deeply observant in the way that only people who are slightly afraid of making mistakes tend to be. She would later be the first person to notice that Margaret had stopped humming. And she would later say that the silence hit her like a dropped tray. The visiting delegation arrived at 10:30 in the morning. This was not unusual. Delegations arrived at the palace with a regularity that could, after enough years, begin to feel almost domestic. There were protocols for them, specific entrances, specific waiting areas, specific members of staff assigned to specific functions. The visiting party on this particular Tuesday was a mid-sized group, 8 people in total, connected to a trade discussion that was important enough to require a formal venue, and not important enough to be on the front page of anything. Security had been briefed. Guest lists had been verified. The blue reception room had received its special flowers, which were, in the opinion of the kitchen staff who had seen them carried past, extremely expensive for something that would be ignored by everyone in the room within approximately 4 minutes of their arrival. Richard presented himself at the side entrance at 23 minutes past 10. He was not on the original list. This, it would later emerge, was the first thing. But it was handled because these things are sometimes handled, because delegations shift and adjust and send ahead people who were not initially included, and because Richard had documentation, good documentation, the kind that had clearly been prepared with care and attention to the specific details that security personnel are trained to look for. He was polished. This is the word that every person who encountered him that morning would later use, independently of one another without coordination. Polished. His suit was correct, not flashy, not cheap, precisely correct. His manner was calibrated to the specific register of confident but deferential that visiting aides tend to project when they are in formal environments. He answered questions with the right amount of detail. He waited where he was asked to wait. He thanked people by their correct titles. Security cleared him in 11 minutes. A senior protocol officer shook his hand and directed him toward the East Corridor, where he would wait with the rest of the delegation support staff until the formal proceedings began. The East Corridor was where Margaret was working. She was mopping, a task that sounds mundane, and is, in fact, deeply technical in a building where the floors are old, and the cleaning solutions must be precisely calibrated, and the direction of the mop strokes matters because of the grain of the wood. She was working her way steadily from the far end toward the reception room, approximately 3 feet to the left of the corridor's center, in the particular unhurried rhythm that 13 years had made automatic. She was humming. Richard walked past her without acknowledgement, which was normal. Most people walked past the housemaids without acknowledgement. This was not rudeness, exactly. It was the particular social invisibility that comes with wearing a certain kind of uniform in a certain kind of building, and Margaret had long since stopped either noticing or minding it. But she noticed him. Specifically, she noticed his shoes. They were good shoes, expensive shoes, the right shoes for the suit, for the occasion, for the building. They were polished, there is that word again, to a standard that suggested either genuine personal pride or deliberate preparation. But they were dry. It had been raining since 7 that morning. A persistent, miserable November rain that had been soaking everything and everyone who moved between any two outdoor points. Every single person who had arrived at the palace that morning, staff, security, delegation members, the delivery man with the extremely expensive flowers, had arrived with some evidence of the rain on them. Damp shoulders, darkened trouser cuffs, the particular slightly flattened quality that hair acquires in wet weather. Richard's shoes were dry. Not recently wiped dry, not dried and slightly marked dry. Simply, completely, perfectly dry, as though he had not walked through any rain at all to get to where he was standing. Margaret did not stop mopping. She did not look up. She did not change her expression, her pace, or the pressure of her hands on the mop handle. But somewhere in the next 30 seconds, without any fanfare and without any drama, the humming stopped. People who have never worked inside a formal institution of this kind tend to imagine its security as a system of visible things. Cameras, guards, barriers, checks, the hardware of protection, physical, obvious, documented. And these things exist, of course. They are real and they are important, and a considerable amount of thought and resource goes into their maintenance and improvement. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. But the people who work inside these buildings, who have worked inside them for years, for decades, will tell you quietly that the cameras see what the cameras are pointed at. The guards watch what they are trained to watch. The checks verify what the checks are designed to verify. And a sufficiently prepared, sufficiently careful person can navigate all of that. What they cannot navigate, what no amount of preparation can fully account for, is the knowledge that accumulates in the people who are there every day, in every corner, at every hour. Palace security at its deepest level is not a system, it is a rhythm. Every building of significant age and regular occupation has one, a particular pace of movement through its spaces, a predictable pattern of sound and smell and foot traffic and door usage. The kitchen smells a certain way at certain hours. The corridor traffic moves in certain directions at certain times. The heating makes specific sounds in specific weather. The flowers in the blue reception room are always replaced on Tuesdays, and the person who replaces them always props the service door open for exactly 4 minutes. When something is wrong, this rhythm does not alarm. It does not flash or beep or send an alert to a screen somewhere. It simply becomes slightly wrong, a note slightly off-key, a sound in the wrong place, a smell that doesn't match the hour, a person moving against the current of a space rather than with it. Most people cannot hear this. Margaret could hear nothing else. This is what 13 years of paying attention inside the same walls produces. Not expertise in the conventional sense, not training, something older and more precise than training, a body-level knowledge of what is correct, so deeply embedded that incorrectness registers before the conscious mind has assembled a reason for it. The shoes were the reason she could name later. The silence that fell over her when she saw them was the knowledge that came first. Sophie was working the connecting corridor, the narrow one between the East Passage and the linen storage room, when she realized she could no longer hear Margaret. She stopped. This requires a small explanation for anyone who was not a member of the palace housekeeping staff during those years. The audible range of Margaret's humming was not wide. It was not the kind of humming that carried through walls or announced itself at a distance. It was quiet, low and continuous, more texture than sound, in the way that a river in the background of a landscape is more texture than sound. But in the particular acoustics of those old corridors, the high ceilings, the stone beneath the carpeting, the specific way that sound moved between the East Passage and the connecting hall, Sophie had learned, without ever consciously deciding to calibrate her sense of where she was in her own work by the presence or absence of that hum. When it stopped, she noticed. She leaned slightly into the East Corridor. Margaret was still mopping, same pace, same posture, same unhurried back and forth movement of the mop. Nothing about her appearance had changed. She was not tense, not visibly alert, not signaling anything to anyone. She was simply not humming. Sophie would later struggle to articulate why this frightened her. She had known Margaret for 7 months. She had never been told explicitly that the humming meant anything. Nobody had sat her down and said, "If you ever stop hearing Margaret, pay attention." And yet, it was like, Sophie said, years afterward, trying to find the right words, hearing a clock stop. You don't realize how much of your sense of everything being normal depends on it until it's gone. She did not say anything. She did not approach Margaret. She did not alert anyone. She simply went back to her work and moved, by a series of small instinctive adjustments, slightly closer to the East Corridor than her task strictly required. Dorothy, arriving from the opposite direction with a linen cart approximately 6 minutes later, also noticed. Dorothy's response was more immediate and considerably less poetic. She parked the linen cart against the wall, folded her hands in front of her, and stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she walked, at a pace that was not hurrying but was also not dawdling, to the small staff communication point at the end of the connecting corridor, where a phone and a laminated list of internal extension numbers had lived since approximately 1991. She did not make a call. She picked up the phone, confirmed there was a dial tone, and replaced the receiver. Then she stood next to it and waited. She could not have explained this behavior to a logical questioner. She could not have said, "I am waiting here because Margaret has stopped humming and that means something is wrong, and when it resolves or escalates, I will know what to do next." She could not have produced a chain of reasoning. She simply knew, with the certainty of 9 years of parallel experience, that she should be near a phone. Richard, meanwhile, had moved approximately 40 feet further down the East Corridor and was standing in the small alcove near the secondary fire door, the one that connected, via a service passage, to a part of the building that visiting delegation members had absolutely no sanctioned reason to access. He was consulting his phone, casually, the way a person consults a phone when they are bored and waiting. His posture was relaxed, his expression was neutral. He was not bored. He was reading a blueprint. What Margaret did next has been described, by the people who witnessed it, in terms that edge toward the theatrical, which is somewhat ironic, given that the act itself was about as theatrical as a woman leaning against a wall. She finished the section of floor she was working on. She walked her mop and bucket to the service alcove on the near side of the East Corridor, the one designated for cleaning equipment, which happened to be approximately 22 feet from where Richard was standing near the fire door. She reached into the front pocket of her uniform. She produced a cigarette. Now, the cigarette requires explanation because the cigarette was not incidental. Margaret did smoke. This was known, accepted, occasionally complained about by Dorothy in a tone that contained no actual objection. But she smoked outside in the small courtyard off the kitchen corridor, in the company of 2 other staff members who also smoked, at times that were established by long habit, mid-morning after lunch, and at the end of her shift. She had never in 13 years smoked in the East Corridor. The East Corridor was not, technically, a no-smoking area in the way that the formal rooms were no-smoking areas. It was simply a place where nobody smoked because nobody had ever smoked there. It was an unwritten rule, which in a palace is sometimes more binding than a written one. Margaret lit the cigarette. She leaned against the wall of the service alcove, not blocking anything, not positioned dramatically, simply present, and she smoked, slowly, with the particular unhurried quality of a woman who has earned this cigarette and intends to finish it at her own pace and has absolutely no interest in anyone else's timeline. The smoke drifted gently into the east corridor. Richard looked up from his phone. Their eyes met briefly, neutrally. He looked back at his phone. Margaret smoked. 30 seconds passed. Then Richard did what any person in his position would do, which was to begin moving, because a woman smoking in a corridor is mildly unusual but not alarming, and his business was elsewhere, and the fire door was right there. He took 3 steps toward it. "That door requires a secondary access card," Margaret said. She had not moved. She had not raised her voice. She said it the way she might say it has been raining since morning, as a simple statement of available fact, offered to no one in particular. Richard stopped. He turned. His expression was pleasant, professionally pleasant, the expression of a man who is accustomed to small administrative complications and handles them with grace. "I was told I'd have full corridor access," he said. Said Margaret. She smoked. "I'll need to check with." "The delegation access covers the east corridor to the blue reception room junction," Margaret said. She tapped ash carefully into the small cleaning equipment alcove where it would fall on a surface that could be wiped. "That door is a fire regulation access point. Secondary card only. It's in the visitor briefing notes, page 3, I think. Second paragraph." She looked at him then, directly, for the first time. "Were you given the visitor briefing notes?" There was a pause. It was a very small pause, half a second perhaps, the kind of pause that a person who is exactly who they say they are would not have, because a person who is exactly who they say they are, who has received official documentation and been properly briefed, would either say yes immediately or say no immediately, with no gap between the question and the answer. Richard said, "Of course." Margaret nodded slowly, in the manner of someone receiving information they have no strong feelings about either way. She finished her cigarette. "The briefing notes also have the protocol officer's extension," she said, producing a small cleaning cloth from her pocket and using it to dispose of the cigarette end in a way that was tidy and technically compliant with the fire regulations she had just cited. "In case you need anything clarified, extension 114. He's usually in until 4. She picked up her mop. She looked at the floor. She began to hum. Richard stood in the corridor for approximately 7 seconds, a duration that Sophie, watching from the connecting hall with her heart rate at a level she would later describe as completely unreasonable for someone who was technically just doing laundry, would remember as feeling considerably longer. Then he took out his phone and made a call. This was the mistake. The mistake was not the call itself. The mistake was the number he dialed. Margaret did not watch him dial it. She had returned to her mopping with every appearance of a woman who had already forgotten this particular interaction and moved on to thinking about whatever housemaids think about at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. Her back was to him. Her mop was moving in its steady, unhurried arc. But the east corridor had those acoustics, the high ceilings, the stone beneath the carpet, the particular quality of sound that old buildings preserve as faithfully as they preserve everything else. She heard 3 tones before he connected. 3 tones was enough. She had worked this building for 13 years. She knew, with the idle certainty of someone who has spent years near a staff phone, the rough tonal signature of an internal extension against an external line. Internal extensions had a particular double click before the tone sequence. External lines were cleaner, faster. The number Richard dialed was external. A man who was genuinely an aide to a visiting delegation, calling the protocol officer's internal extension. The one Margaret had just given him, the one printed on page 3 of the briefing document he had claimed to have received, would have dialed an internal number. Margaret mopped. At the end of the corridor, Dorothy was still standing next to the phone. She saw Margaret's mop stop its arc and resume it in the opposite direction, a reversal of the pattern she had been following, a small, precise inversion that had no cleaning rationale whatsoever. Dorothy picked up the phone and dialed extension 114. "This is Dorothy from housekeeping," she said when the protocol officer answered. "I'm in the east corridor. We may have something. A gentleman near the secondary fire door, delegation credentials. Margaret thinks his shoes are wrong." There was a brief silence on the other end. Anyone unfamiliar with the palace's informal communication systems might have found this message inadequate, incomplete, lacking in the kind of specific, actionable detail that security situations are supposed to involve. The protocol officer, who had worked in that building for 19 years, said, "Don't move." He arrived in 4 minutes. He arrived with 2 colleagues and the original delegation manifest, and the documentation that Richard had presented at the side entrance, which was now being reviewed against a secondary database that the initial entry check had not accessed. The documentation was good. It was genuinely impressive, the kind of thing that represented significant preparation and not inconsiderable resource. But it had one flaw, which was the flaw of all things built on a false premise. It was constructed around a version of the palace's internal layout and protocol system that was approximately 18 months out of date. The secondary fire door that Richard had been attempting to access had been reclassified 8 months ago. The reclassification was internal, unpublicized, and reflected in the current visitor briefing notes, which Richard had not received, because he was not who he said he was. The secondary database returned its results 6 minutes after the protocol officer's arrival. Richard was detained, calmly, professionally, without any of the physical drama that the word detained tends to suggest, in the east corridor, approximately 30 feet from the door he had been attempting to reach. He was cooperative. He remained pleasant. He answered questions in the calibrated, confident manner of someone who has prepared thoroughly. Throughout this, Margaret mopped. She worked her way steadily to the far end of the east corridor, completed the section, gathered her equipment, and walked back through the connecting hall toward the linen storage room. Sophie, who was still hovering in the connecting hall with the determined casualness of someone pretending very hard to fold something, watched her go. "Margaret," she said. Margaret stopped. "How did you know?" Sophie asked. "Just from the shoes." Margaret considered this. "The shoes were what I could name," she said. "Knowing came earlier." She looked at Sophie with the expression of a woman who is about to give advice and is deciding how much of it is actually transferable. "The building has a feeling," she said. "When the feeling is right, you don't think about it. When it's wrong, something in you knows before your head catches up." She picked up her equipment. The shoes were just me catching up. She went to put away her cleaning things. The east corridor was quiet, ordinary, correctly lit. The heating was still failing in its usual November way. Somewhere toward the reception room, the very expensive flowers were being ignored by everyone in the room, exactly as the kitchen staff had predicted. Everything was exactly as it should be. The official record of what happened that Tuesday is brief. A visiting individual with falsified credentials was detained and subsequently questioned by the relevant authorities. No formal rooms were accessed. No materials were compromised. Existing security protocols were reviewed and updated. The matter was handled. 3 sentences, passive voice throughout, the architecture of institutional understatement. What the official record does not mention is that the internal review which followed identified 4 specific gaps in the existing entry verification process. Gaps that Richard's documentation had been carefully designed to exploit. It does not mention that 2 of those gaps were identified not by the security review team, but by a written account, requested informally and received on 2 sheets of lined paper in a neat, small hand. From Margaret Holloway, housekeeping staff. Her account did not use security terminology. It did not reference protocols or access classifications or threat categories. It described, simply and precisely, the things she had noticed. The shoes, the position near the fire door, the casualness that was slightly too calibrated, the external call on a number that should have been internal, the fact that he had not looked at the flowers when he passed them. This last detail puzzled the review team initially. Everyone looks at the flowers in the East Corridor, one of the reviewers noted in the margin of his copy. They're remarkable. Every first-time visitor looks at them. Richard had not looked at the flowers, because Richard had seen the East Corridor before, in photographs, in diagrams, in whatever materials he had used to prepare. But photographs and diagrams do not prepare you for the sensory reality of a space the way actually being in it does. They do not tell you what to look at because they cannot tell you what surprises people. He had walked past flowers that should have stopped him, and a woman who should have been invisible had noticed. This detail was incorporated into a new element of the visitor monitoring briefing. It is, as far as anyone knows, still there. Margaret was thanked by the head of household in a private meeting that lasted approximately 12 minutes. She was told that her actions had been noted at a senior level and that her service was valued. She was offered and declined a formal commendation on the grounds that she would rather not have the paperwork. She returned to work the next morning at her usual time. Dorothy asked her, over the first cup of tea of the day, whether she felt differently about things. About what things? Margaret asked. About what happened, about what you did. Margaret wrapped both hands around her cup and considered the November light coming through the break room window with the expression of a woman who is being asked to be more dramatic than she intends to be. I noticed something wrong, she said. I slowed it down, other people did the rest. You set a trap with a cigarette, Dorothy said. I gave a man who didn't belong there a reason to stand still long enough for the people who were supposed to notice him, Margaret said. That's not a trap, that's just time. Dorothy considered this. You're being deliberately modest, she said. I'm being accurate, Margaret said, and picked up her mug and her equipment list and went to begin her work. The humming started before she reached the corridor. Sophie, arriving for her shift 9 minutes later and hearing it from the stairwell, felt something she would only identify properly years afterward. The particular, uncomplicated relief of knowing that the person who notices everything is present and paying attention and has found nothing yet worth going silent for. She hung up her coat and went to work. There are people in every institution, every palace, every hospital, every school, every building where important things happen and important people move, who are paid to see and trained to see and equipped with every tool that resources and technology can provide. And then there are the people who simply never stopped looking, who learned, over years of quiet presence in the same spaces, to hear the note that is slightly wrong, to feel the rhythm that has shifted, to notice the person who does not look at the flowers. These people are rarely in the official record. They are in the break rooms and the staff corridors and the small institutional memories that pass between people who showed up every day for years and paid attention, not because they were asked to, but because that is simply what they do. Margaret Holloway worked those corridors for 23 years. She retired through a side door. She never gave an interview. But palace staff remember the humming, and they remember the silence, and what came after it. And in the East Corridor on a Tuesday morning in November, If you work there long enough and pay attention carefully enough, you begin to understand what Dorothy meant when she said that the humming is just how you know she's still being polite about it. The people closest to the floor,